So I'd just like to welcome everybody to our Intelex webinar for this afternoon. I can see the attendees starting to flood in already, so that's good to see. So thank you very much indeed for coming along today. Obviously, because it's a webinar on Zoom, it might be your morning, your afternoon, your evening. That's the beauty of these webinars, isn't it? That you can join from wherever you are in the world, and we're grateful to have you. So thanks very much for setting the time aside. So we're going to have a little brief introduction from me before we hand over to Intelex. That's our webinar sponsor for today, as you can see from the screen. Who am I? My name is Nigel Fellows. I'm one of the directors at Bay Publishing. We publish Health and Safety International magazine, Health and Safety Middle East magazine, AWE International magazine, and also the OSE directory online. So you may have come across the webinar through us as a reader or a subscriber. Perhaps that's the way you discovered this webinar today, but perhaps you're already a customer of Intelex or you're already aware of their offerings. Who are they? Well, as you know, Intelex are an international company, very international company, and they develop web and mobile applications that streamline and simplify environmental safety and quality management. So that's what we're going to be learning about today from Intelex. Our theme for today, as you can see on the screen, is leveraging safety culture through health and safety process improvement. So what does that mean? And what are we going to take away? What's going to be your takeaway for today? What's the one thing to remember to make sure that you go away with something to remember all the other stuff with? Well, a couple of sentences that you may have already seen in our marketing material for this webinar. I'd like to read this to you about workers, about humans, about ourselves. Workers quite often apply shortcuts. When they do something over and over again, they'll take a shortcut to get a job done safer, rather faster, should I say, more easily, not always more safely, of course. And that's the problem. It results in poor decisions, bad decisions, and ultimately accidents or human cost or financial cost. So there is a way for us to kind of lock that down, for employers to lessen the likelihood of that happening, tighten up our processes and our methodologies to leave less room for this to happen and for dangers and problems or accidents to happen. So that's what we're going to be learning about today. Who are we learning from? Well, in a moment, I'll introduce to you Scott Gaddis. He is the practice leader for EHS at Intelex Technologies. I'll be handing over to Scott in a moment. A little bit about Scott's background. So much history here in the safety industry, so much experience to draw from, which we look forward to hearing about in a moment. He's responsible at Intelex for the engagement of EHS professionals, giving them a platform for sharing information and collectively driving solutions that mitigate those workplace losses of all kinds that we're trying to avoid. So he's worked at Gaddis, high performance packaging company in Chicago. Before that, he was at Bristol Myers Squibb for a while, 5 years, 18 years with the Kimberly-Clark Corporation. And also he was with the GE company as EHS director. So plenty of experience for us to take advantage of today. One last thing, make sure that during or before or after the webinar, you connect with Intelex somehow. So it might be social media, it might be by email. We'll certainly be downloading the question and answer format that we'll be sharing in later. But make sure you connect with them so they can keep this conversation going with you and you can continue to learn. So that's enough from me. Thank you very much. All that leaves me to do now is to hand over to Scott, who'll be taking us through the webinar, leveraging safety culture through health and safety process improvement.
Very good, Nigel. If you could allow me to take over with my slides.
There we go.
Thank you. Okay. I'm hoping you can see my screen, if that's possible. Okay, well, wonderful. It's absolutely a pleasure for me to be here. You can probably detect that I am not from the UK or the EU. I'm from the US. Currently, it's early morning here in the state of Kentucky, where I have my primary residence. I'm still drinking coffee, so it's still fairly early, but it's wonderful to be here. So, good morning, good afternoon to all of you that have elected to listen to me for the next hour. I have had a lot of experience. I actually have a couple of degrees in safety and health, and with an emphasis on environmental management. I began back in 1989, believe it or not. So I've been around quite a long time, over 30 years in practice. And then the last 3 years I have spent with Intelex as a vice president and practice leader to really help the company understand EHS from a practitioner's viewpoint, to help product teams understand what practitioners need when they consider digitizing information. So it's a really fun assignment. It's a very organic assignment. But me at heart, I grew up in manufacturing, and I still feel that way. So I'm just a practitioner like many of you, and I'm sure there are some that do this much better than I do. But I'm going to speak from maybe a side of time, because I have been around a long time, and maybe some of the wisdom that I've gained because of that. I think when I was asked to present this topic, it was really an easy topic for me to think about, because this is really how I have performed work for almost 30 years. I grew up in a career where you saw a lot of practitioners that were choosing sides. So, in the early 90s, we had behavior-based safety. That went over to, using training systems differently and digitizing those, putting them on the computer. And then we moved into to human and organizational performance over the last decade, which has really benefited the practice of safety. I think maybe more in elevating what culture really means to a practitioner and how we should influence the work system. So as a practitioner, I have always thought that it's a very complex issue to really look deep into the management system and figure out, or to find out, what some of the gaps are, or some of these fractures that prevent you from really getting to your desired state, which is improved performance, from the work system. So today, an agenda very quickly, I'll discuss it through a lost case study. We won't spend a lot of time doing that. I really want to spend a little bit of time talking about deviance and error, a safety model that I've used personally through my career, talk a little bit about loss causation, and then some very key things I think that you could do in building safety process. So, I often start with this slide, and sometimes it gets me in a lot of hot water when I speak about it. But, I was speaking with a group of brand new graduates that had their degrees in safety and health. And one of them asked me a question: what do you think our job is as safety leaders? And without a lot of thought, this certainly popped out of my mouth. As safety leaders, our job is to leverage or to force the behaviors of employees into making correct decisions by removing variables from the work that drive them to make wrong decisions. And you can imagine that when I said that, it sounded really smart. When I read it, it sounded somewhat inflammatory, right? Because I don't think that I get up wanting to force people, but I certainly get up every morning wanting to leverage thinking. And when you think about it that way, and I'll try to clear that up as we go forward, is that as a practitioner, I do get up in the morning wanting to build process and refine process in such a way that it leverages, that it gives you little room to make error. Doesn't always work that way. As you know, there's a lot of fluidity in the work system, but trying to remove enough error from the work system so that it really forces them to make the decision that you want them to make, right, as a practitioner. So I think there's a lot of room, and certainly I don't want you to pin or copy that quote and share it. That that's the way that Scott thinks about everything. But I certainly get up in the morning wanting to embrace and leverage behaviors in a way that removes the ability to make really poor decisions. And I would really ask you to start thinking that way, right? What can I do that really forces or leverages the right decision in the work process? I'll start, with a very simple, case study. And some of you may know about this case study, and I'm going to try to just plow through it from the slide deck. But I titled it "When Bad Things Happen to Good People." And this was the West Fertilizer Company, April 2013, so almost a decade ago, happened in West Texas. They had a fire and an explosion that killed 15 people, had over 260 injuries, some of those very severe, damaged property on 150 structures. The cause was a fire and, of course, an explosion that was resulting after the fire. And then we're still counting loss. I mean, the losses continue to mount every year. I kind of check on this story. But as of today, we've had about 260 million USD in losses simply because of this particular case. If you don't know a lot about it, I would simply say that it occurred at West Fertilizer Company. It was a fertilizer blending and retail distribution center in West Texas. They had a fire. Emergency crews first got word of that fire, and they responded, and they engaged the fire. And then they had a massive explosion that happened about 20 minutes after they started fighting the fire. The origin of the fire that started, we just don't know. It's still unknown. There's been a lot of speculation that it could have been arson, but no one to date has been charged. At the time of the tragedy, the plant supplied farmers with chemicals to help crops grow, like corn and wheat and hay. And of course, it was in the, in an area in Texas that was quite suburban. It was certainly away from large population groups, but certainly in a small town around, several occupancies. So the violent detonation, it injured, and fatally injured 12 emergency responders, 3 members of the public. Local hospitals treated more than 260. Maybe some of the other things here is the blast completely destroyed the facility, caused widespread damage over 150 off-site buildings. It destroyed completely 2 schools, a 22-unit apartment complex, and then a nursing home. When this was investigated by the CSB, the Chemical Safety Board, it's one of the most destructive incidents that have ever been investigated. So there's a lot of things here to unravel, and we won't have time to unravel them in this particular sessions. But what I want to get to is the amount of destruction simply from a fertilizer factory adjacent to a small Texas town. 40 to 60 tons of fertilizer, grade ammonium nitrate was stored there. The detonation was about 15 to 2,000 pounds of TNT. And then ammonium nitrate and anhydrous ammonia were both inorganic fertilizers that were being stored here in these buildings. So a lot of things were happening. What I want to get you to is this particular page, is that the Chemical Safety Board issued a report after this had happened, and look at the list of things that were caused or that had a hand in causing these events to happen. Improper storage of chemicals, lack of ventilation, very poor fire protection systems, inadequate hazmat training for emergency personnel that responded, flawed emergency response procedures. There was not an incident command system or a center that was established, lack of safety inspection. We had a lot of weak government regulations of chemical storage for this particular area of regulation. Very poor land planning. It was residential and commercial development was allowed to grow around this plant. Inadequate training, and then finally, what was found, and maybe I should have put it in bolded print, is that there was a lot of poor management oversight. So, why do I tell this story? And what I wanted to do, right, is to get you to this next page, is what I've called the normalization of deviance. And if there's one thing that I would like for everyone to take away from this session, is an understanding of what we call the normalization of deviance. And we detail it or describe it or define it as this, is that when small changes in behavior start to occur, expanding the boundaries that allow additional deviations to become acceptable. In essence, when deviant events are tolerated, the potential for error grows and events are overlooked, misinterpreted, or simply allowed without question. As deviant behavior is repeated without catastrophic results. Think about it that way. When things happen in your work systems and nothing happens, it really becomes a social norm in the organization. Several years ago, Diane Vaughn published a book about the space shuttle Columbia, and it came apart because of damage to the heat shield. It was re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, and 7 astronauts died. And what was found, right, is that NASA had fallen prey to the normalization of deviance for a second time. They had this with the Challenger with an O-ring failure, but the shuttle was returning with damaged heat shields prior to the one that actually catastrophically exploded in the sky the last time. So when things happen, when deviant events are tolerated, when their potential for error grows, many times nothing happens, right? Sometimes bad things really happen. And it's not just NASA. I mean, we've had the BP oil spill, the Deepwater Horizon, of course, the Upper Big Branch coal mine, all of those being here in the States. The healthcare systems, right? Even public safety too. So there's a lot of things to unravel here that we won't have, time for. But it was this West Fertilizer company that I'll talk about. When deviations slowly began, and you saw some of those learnings that I talked about, when there was a shortcut that was allowed the first time, when it became socially norm over a period of time, then of course the error in the process, it grew. Frequently we're lucky, many times we're not. Luck runs out, and I'm not a big believer in luck, but when you have one or two complicating things happen in your work process, people get hurt. And I could talk about this particular part for days, but it can happen to you. And when I think about it in the framework of culture, some of you may be wondering, well, I thought we were going to talk about culture. This is culture. Are the things within the work system that you really need to understand so you can drive process robust enough so it enhances or it increases the culture that you really, really want. When I think about errors, I think it's really important that you think about it in 3 different levels. There are 3 types of error that lay within a safety management system, or even a management system in general. But we first have these latent errors. These are the errors in design. They're management decisions that we make. They're the organizational stuff that we see every single day when we go into work at 6 a.m. and clock out at 6 p.m. They're the things that really don't change. They're just embedded in this organizational management system. It's how we train people. It's these maintenance-related errors that lead to operator error, right? So things that we're just allowing to stay in the work system are latent. The negative consequences of these type of mistakes is that they're dormant. So they really lay in the system for a really long time. And at some point they become armed, right? So that's that second level, is that they're what I call ready to fire, right? They're errors that are in position to affect persons, property, or process, and in position or growing in position to affect. So we've armed them really by increasing the frequency in which they will occur. So you can imagine that I ran a paper business for a long time. I was the global director of safety and health for Kimberly-Clark. I had paper equipment all around the world. I had case packers. I had all type of equipment where employees wanted to reach in to clear jams and things like that. I can't tell you the number, of people that would do that, but I'm certain that I had a lot that would try to do that. Sometimes they were successful, but every once in a while, they weren't fast enough, they were too slow, or maybe they were too fast, right? But they got caught. And so it was because we were arming the error within the system. So it was in position to affect people or property or process. And then the last one, I think, is really simple to understand. These are the active errors. They're the errors made, and the results of the effects are really realized very, very quickly. So when you think about active errors, we see these a lot, on the front line of a manufacturing, facility, or even a service organization. It's when those effects, when we've made a mistake and we see those effects of that mistake almost immediately. So think about it in that way: is what are your latent errors in your work system? What have you armed? What's position? What type of frequency is picking up within the work system that's going to generate, an active error to occur? So I think many of you, right, know this particular model. I particularly like this model, the Swiss cheese model, I call it. But James Reason, he introduced this image of a Swiss cheese to explain the occurrence of system failures. The Swiss cheese model of accident causation, I'll call it, suggests systematic failure, right? Or these accidental losses occur from a series of events that at these different layers of your cheese. And then, of course, you can see that there's these holes, and those represent opportunity for failure, right? So each slice has a layer within the systems, and when these holes and these within these layers line up, then of course a loss occurs, right? So the better you are at inserting these defenses, or these quote slices of cheese, the better you are at the chance of stopping the occurrence of loss. I think the big question for the practitioner to think about is, what are these layers, right, of the system that you need to really build out that are executable? For me, it's real simple, and I'll get to it at the end of the presentation. But things like training, things like skill development, things like procedures and policies, and some of those things, right? Those are all layers within the system that you really need to think about when you're trying to, to stop or to mitigate a hazard from becoming a loss. A lot of things that can go on with this model, but certainly what I want you to pick up from this is that, your question should be to yourself: what are my defenses that stop, the conditions or these acts from happening? And what can I insert within the system to slow it down, or to certainly stop it from occurring? So what are the holes in your work system? So that's a question I would ask you. And then maybe the better question is that what are the holes in your work systems that are preventing you from having the culture that you really desire to have in your work system? So kind of moving on from that, there's all kind of models that we could talk about, that we could consider in this discussion to understanding process variability. And I'll get into one just in a few moments. And regarding safety, I think there's three things here, though, that I continue to reflect on, is that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that we really struggle to identify core causal factors of error before loss occurs. And some of that is simply because we don't have the knowledge and wisdom yet. We may be young in the practice, and some of us are more compliance minded than we are management system compliant. So if we continue to see corrective actions, for example, directed toward worker behavior committed an unsafe act, we're probably wrong in how we're handling the work system. There's also a lot of evidence that suggests that it's critical to view worker error as substandard, as opposed to simply being an unsafe act. I started the conversation saying, man, I really do want to leverage behavior in my organization. And the first thing that I really had to come to was the thinking that I don't really believe that employees come to work with the idea that I want to be hurt. I think everyone really does want to end their work safe and healthy, and they want to go home. However, I think they also have a lot of differing risk profiles, right? So we have some that are willing to take more risk than others. But if we can look at it that way, if we can look at culture and error as an employee acting substandardly, then we can look at all of those errors within the systems that help us rid that or to mitigate it. The last thing I would say is if decision making is regarded as at risk, right, or substandard, we're really able to recognize those errors within the management system. And through conversation and learning, we can fill that process gap. So why do they have that level of risk? Why do they continue to do the things that they do? That requires conversation, and it requires us, from the other side as practitioners, to fill those process gaps with programming. So we'll get into some of that right now. I spent most of my career, like I say, and I'm a big advocate that without a solid, robust management system, you're really throwing darts. I don't think that you can build compliance enough to take away all of the worry that you have about employee safety. I think you really do have to look at the management system and see what those gaps are. How I explain that is I explain it through work system contact stages. So I spent a tremendous amount of time really studying Frank Bird, right, and Germain's loss causation model. They recognized the need that a management system needed to focus on pre-contact stages to really get you or to leverage your system to where you want it to be. And I believe the model reflects a couple of things here: direct management relationship with causes and effects and accidental loss, and then incorporating a process that shows you've got this multilinear application that interacts with the system. So that's a lot of ways to say is that most of your work as practitioners is at the pre-contact stage, right? And I think everyone knows that. But in the case study that I just exposed to you, there were so many variables, or these errors that laid up in the work system that created all these contact events. They didn't always happen, right? But then you saw just this tremendous event happen where they all happened at once. So most of our work is in the pre-contact stage. But before we go there, I think it's fair, that we talk about post-contact. And I think exploring the model, accident prevention methods developed are from sequential models, right? We see these many times from sequential models, trying to find root cause, trying to eliminate some of those root causes. But to begin, the result of an accident or an incident is loss. It's usually unattended harm or damage. But what I would like you to understand is that many times we focus just on the person, right? So when we go in to look at loss, many times we don't go past this person that has suffered some type of illness or injury. But I would tell you that the learnings are as important in these other categories as well. If we have a piece of equipment that is not performing the way that it should, it creates, right, a level of risk to an employee that may be operating that piece of equipment. I've often said is that my best manufacturing facilities in regard to uptime, limiting downtime, production quality, when all of those business factors were really, really good, my safety record was really, really good. So I know this for a fact, and I've talked about it quite a lot, is that my best performing facilities where people did not have to interact unintentionally with my equipment were my best performing plants. So, think about that as that when you do have loss, it's important for you to look at equipment loss. It's important that you look at the materials that you're buying, everything from raw materials to finished goods. How does that affect an employee's behavior? How does that affect the culture that I'm really trying to drive in the facility? The environment where they're working, is it too hot? Is it too cold? Do I have enough light? Is it too dark in that facility? Right, a lot of things about the physical environment that are my floors, slippery. So a lot of things, right, kind of go into that category that I'll kind of go into, into more detail. But once a threshold level, right, is exceeded, here's an important part of this is that the type and the degree of loss then becomes a matter of chance. Some of the worst injuries that I've had in my career were falls to the same level. I'm amazed, right, when I look back. But it's a matter of, quote, chance once an event goes past a threshold. So the effects, may range from insignificant to quite catastrophic. And maybe the event at the West Fertilizer Company started as somewhat insignificant, but it grew very, very quickly. So, we take a big chance when we allow loss to occur in the facility. Common types, I won't go through this a lot, but you can see those. These are very common ones that you deal with on a daily basis. Struck against, bumping into, struck by, by a moving object, maybe fall to, fall on, caught in, caught between, contact with, maybe a chemical, maybe heat, right, some type of energy source. And then overstress. Am I lifting too much, right? Am I in a bad posture when I'm doing that? So, what are the gaps in your management system that would allow these types of contact to happen, and how are you controlling the work system, right? So that's my question for you, and maybe what you should take away is that does control in this area leverage good behavior, or does it allow some fractures in the behavior that I really want? This next area, of course, is still, something I think that we need to talk about. But I would almost preface it this way: if this is where you're stopping in your work process to try to mitigate incidents from occurring, you're stopping a little short. I talk to practitioners almost daily, and when I look, and one of the beauties of working for Intelex is I can look at a lot of information. I'm amazed by how many organizations stop here. Is what I would say are the immediate causes of the reasons things happen. The immediate causes of incidents or accidents are the circumstances that immediately precede the contact. And it's usually, seen or I can sense it. So I can look at something and say, well, that's a substandard act. We many times call these unsafe acts and unsafe conditions, but are they really? Are they more defined as substandard? It's just something that we do, and maybe it's because we normalize that deviance. So it relates to practices and conditions that may meet to a performance standard, for example, a basis of a measurement, right? So there's a lot of things that kind of go into this particular category. But these are the things that you see, and I'll use an example. When you see a guard off of a piece of equipment, well, the immediate cause is somebody took that guard off, and that may have been a substandard act. The substandard condition, of course, is the guard being off. If you put the guard back on and return to work, you stopped a little short, because I can guarantee you, and many of you are on this call today, when you come back maybe 2 weeks from now that you'll find that guard off again, right? So you've not gone far enough to eliminate or to mitigate the real reason why you see the things that you do. So those are substandard acts and substandard practices. And of course, I'm not going to spend a lot of time there, because I think most of you know this, but some of the common ones, and I won't read all of this list, but you can see substandard acts or practices, the failure to obey rules, removing safety devices, failure to use PPE, horseplay. Some of the injuries that I've had throughout my career have been just simply horseplay. And then servicing operating equipment, it's reaching into the machine, so to speak, to clear a jam. Substandard conditions, inadequate guards, defective PPE, defective tools, inadequate warning systems. And you can see the differences is that many times, these are on the management side of things, is you have a worker that's acting a certain way simply because of some of the substandard or the challenging conditions that they're working in. So a lot of stuff here to unpack. This is where maybe I want to get to the meat of the presentation, because I think it's the cure for the for the cancer, so to speak, is that when we look at direct causes, and direct causes are the diseases, right? They're the disease or the real causes behind the symptoms that you're looking at within the work system. It's why substandard acts and conditions occurred. The factors that, when you can identify them, prevent you to have management control. And we often call them, and some of you may call them, root causes. So I look at them in two different categories here, right? We have personal factors, and of course we have job factors. And direct causes or root causes really help to explain why people are performing substandardly in the system. Logically, I think that a person is likely not to follow a procedure that they don't know about, or they have not been trained, or they've simply been asked to read it in a book. So there's a lot of stuff here, right? When you look at personal factors. But here's a longer list, and I could speak hours just on this, because many times when we go after root cause, it's simply more focused on job factors, right, than it is on these personal factors. But look at some of these personal factors. I'm not capable enough to do the job tasks that you've asked me to do. I have a tremendous amount of stress. One of the things that I've noticed over the last 2 years, there's a tremendous amount of tension and stress in the work system brought on by the pandemic, right? But there's all kinds of stress. There's marital stress, right? There's stress brought on by children. So a lot of things that are outside of the workplace are brought in, that affects the way that they can do their job. A lack of knowledge, I just don't know enough. Lack of skill, of course, and improper motivation. I have a boss, right? I have a supervisor that's demanding that I do more than I physically can, right? And maybe even emotionally can. And then look on the other side of that, job factors, inadequate leadership. I do have a bad supervisor, maybe, right? Inadequate engineering. I'm not buying, or I'm not designing the right equipment to do the job. Inadequate purchasing. We're buying substandard personal protective equipment. Inadequate maintenance. I'm only reacting to maintenance requests. I'm not doing preventive maintenance. Inadequate tools and equipment. Inadequate work standards. Wear and tear, abuse and misuse. There's a lot of stuff here to unpack, and we won't be able to do it. But it's an amazing part of what your role is as a practitioner, especially when it comes to influencing the safety culture and these behaviors in the work system. If I have someone that is in the work system and they don't have the capability or the knowledge or the necessary skills that they need, well, you can bet that I have lodged an error within the work system that at some point could come back, right? When my luck runs out, I could have, failure within the system that creates, a catastrophic event, or it may just be somewhat of a limited event. But that's the way that I want you to thinking about this, is that when you look at your work system, when you look at these causes that you see within the work system, what are these things that are preventing me from getting to the targets that I really desire? And I know what your target is to return people home safe and healthy every single night. So look at that list saying, where do I have failures within the work system? Where does the management system lack control in these areas? Because I can promise you that it really does affect the way that your safety culture reacts to how you feel, right? And how the organization feels about safety, their value. I think another area is if you've gone down through root cause, I would like for you to maybe go just a little bit further, is to test your system. And this is very deep in the pre-context stage. A control feature of a management system is really essential. And when I'm thinking this way, look at your systems, look at your standards, and look at how you're complying to those things. So do you have a management system? And then, because you may have that management systems, what type of standards have you documented, have you written, have you valued and embraced, and have you communicated those and trained against those with the organization? And do you have compliance, right, with those? So if I were to have, quote, an injury, I would start trying to understand what my immediate causes were, what my root causes were, and now I'll look at the management system. So an inadequate system, it's inadequate because you have too few of things, in the systems. You have inadequate system activity. So you're not covering enough. And, I think with the adoption of things like ISO 45001, which is new, almost written as a performance standard, that could be a standard that you laid on the desk, right? Says, well, where do I see fractures within my management system when I compare it to this international standard? There are many of those that you could do that that with. But many times when I've taken over an organization as the corporate leader, I look at the management system and I see a really brief document that does not cover enough, right? So we've taken a very hybrid approach and said, well, we're just going to focus on these 10 or 15 things. Maybe you need to have more systems control for the behaviors that you're really trying to drive and leverage in the work system. Inadequate standards, there's a lot of confusion, and maybe there's failure in the systems because you just don't understand the standards that you're being asked to perform in the workplace. So simply put, I think standards specify what is to be done and who does that. Does your organization understand, do the employees and the workers in your organizations understand really what they are supposed to do to help you get to a level of adequate control? And then I think inadequate compliance with standards. This is another one of those areas that's quite broad. We won't have enough time to speak about it, but it's a common area of concern when you're looking at control of your system, is that we don't value compliance enough, or we're not spending enough time, or you're not resourced at the level that you need to be resourced to maintain compliance. So the first thing I would say is, do you have a system? Do you have a standard that's written to support that system? And then do you have compliance? And maybe that last one is that if you don't have compliance, if people are not doing what you've written, what you've adopted in the organization, are you sure that those standards are adequate, for where they are on their journey? So a lot of things there to unpack, but just kind of think some of those things. So I would say this: where are your loss gaps, right? Zero incidents through error-free work performance. It's just not a sustainable goal. Your model to improve safety culture is more than observation and feedback, and that's how I grew up in safety in the early 90s. Is that, I was being sold by consultants that all you need to do is to improve behaviors, to go out and observe it and give feedback. But I really kind of thought through that very, very quickly. And I said, there's more to it than that. If I were to ask a worker to go out and work in an unsafe environment, but to simply have the right behavior, I might get those behaviors for a while, right? But I don't think it's a sustainable goal to be able to achieve that over and over again. So I had to look at the management system, right? It's systemic. A management system is systemic, it's explicit, and it's comprehensive for managing safety risk. So just simply allowing yourself to say, I can work through worker performance to get what I want is not a sustainable goal. The safety management system, I would say this: it's woven into the fabric of an organization. It becomes part of this culture we continue to talk about, and it's a way that people just simply do their job. But it's a very complicated thing to understand. Rarely, if ever, are incidents caused by a single factor within the management system. Rarely. Multiplicity and complexity of accident causation, especially this interrelation of individual and organizational and job variables, are just some, right, of many factors that could determine why loss occurs. And I think it's an important concept to understand, is that when we think about ourselves in this way, right, when you look at your work system in this way, it allows you to focus on where your loss gaps actually are. And it really kind of goes back to that West Fertilizer company, right? Those events. What would have happened if some of those events had happened in reverse? What would have happened if the fire that happened at that facility was outside and away, right, from those chemicals? Well, it would not probably have been catastrophic. They would put the fire out and everybody would have returned back, safe. But because there was complexity, right, within this event, these things just continue to grow forward. So maybe best summarizing and reflecting on this is that management system failures are best prevented and minimized by barriers, right? By these barriers and defenses that are built into the overall system. I've often said that I was doing human and organizational performance way before we had this term called HOP, right? So, but I think that there is a lot to say about that, is that you really need to look through your management system to determine where your losses are. All right, to support my presentation and how I've led program, I thought that I would put this as a slide to talk about, maybe start ending with, is what I've called the safety process model. I really looked at process very early in my career, and using it as a backdrop to tell a story. Is I think asking a worker, and I kind of covered some of this, to improve his or her behavior to work safely without providing guarded equipment, right? Without giving that person the necessary training that they need. Are just a couple of examples of allowing too much variability to reside in the work system. And when you allow so much variability in the work system, you get this area we call the normalization of deviance. So you just start accepting it. Each element of a safety system is literally dependent, and it hinges on the success of the others. And that's a really important concept, I think, to understand. I would also propose that you look at process performance or the robustness of your process and ask yourself, are you really getting the culture that you desire? And if you're depending to deliver targeted performance through people, I think you got to look at it a little bit differently. And this is how I've done it, for almost 30 years. Very rarely has this process changed. I would say that, each of these five circles here represent areas of control that I really use to push the management system forward, but they're all weighted differently, right? So we may spend more of our time working on one of these particular system elements than we do others, and that comes through assessment of the management system. So I would say, how is your work environment? Is it a safe environment? Are you compliant with regulation? Are you hiring the right people? Are you retaining the right people? A lot of stuff there to impact. But the work environments are the things that I always consider that, when you come into work at 6 a.m. and you go home at 6 p.m., it's about the same stuff. So it's that environment that you're doing your work in. It rarely changes, or if it does, it doesn't change very rapidly. So look at HR policies, all of those kind of things kind of go into your work environment. The second area I would tell you is capability and skills development. In the organizations where I've been able to build EHS capability and to build their skills, they're simply my best performing facilities that I've ever had. The other side of that is that it's not only important to build capability and skills, but it's the capacity side of that. Are you allowing that person to give it back to the organization? I've been really blessed in my career because I've worked in high performance type of organization. So, my ability to build capability in a person and then expect them to give it back to a coworker or to a crew has been absolutely instrumental in performance. So are you building people? Are you developing skills? And then are you allowing them the time to give it back to the rest of the organization? And that helps you, right, with partnership and participation from the work environment. I think management, leadership, and accountability, a lot of my time has been focused in this particular category, is that do I have the right senior leadership team? Do they value safety and health in the organization? Are they accountable, and do they communicate well? For most of my career, and I've worked for presidents and CEOs of companies, really the only thing that I need from that level of the organization is commitment and value for what I'm trying to do, right? And then communication that we do have value, and then I can slip down just a bit and talk to mid-level supervisors, right? But management, leadership, and accountability is really pivotal in driving the culture that you're really trying to achieve. I think employee behavior and engagement, one side of that, I think it is important to engage employees. I think it is important that you look at the behavior of the organization, but we're all very fluid organizations, and all of you certainly need to do that a bit differently. Feedback and observation are certainly a part of that, but I think conversation, right? Gimbal walks, actually getting out to the floor and building relationships, really, really important to doing that. And then how are my mid-level leaders interacting with the employees, as they do the work? Are they doing, the work that holds them accountable, but drives expectation that we do value the system differently? And then finally, system tools. I think it's very difficult for me to think about doing my role anymore without having system tools. If you were to look at me 20 years ago, I had stuff dancing around on paper, right, in every site. But because of technology, I can do things differently now. I can monitor the systems differently. I have software at my disposal. I can put sensors up to monitor the the changes. So lots of stuff there. So very quickly, and I know I'm running out of time, I think leveraging change in the environment is you got to determine your level of control of your current safety process. That requires you to assess it, to audit it, identify where your problems are or what these errors are that I talked about. Where are they residing in your work process? Are they immediate causes? Do you have these direct causes that you need to focus on? Or do you really just have inadequate control of your system? So those are questions I think you should ask yourself. Diagnose larger systemic cultural issues. Where do my cultural issues actually reside? Is it in my people? Is it because I'm not exhibiting or expecting a certain behavior? Do I have an environment that's not safe for them to work in? And do I have a poor leadership team? So a lot of stuff there to impact, but I would say you have to diagnose the softer side of your work system and also the harder side, which I would consider the environment and training. Determine probable solutions, consider all of these consequences for outcome. I think the one thing that I do know a lot about is that you cannot force culture, right? You have to really breed it within the organization. You really have to seed those things in the organizations. And you may have to start with a microculture with a crew that you really trust, right? And grow it from there. But it's a journey, and certainly it's not, something that you simply flip a switch on. Promote your solutions to your shareholders, gain endorsement. If you don't have local shareholders that you trust, gain endorsement, you may want to look a level up from that. But I think it's very possible for you to start small and get very big when you're trying to leverage change. Certainly it's the way that I've done it throughout my career. And then monitor for compliance. Are you getting what you want to get? And then don't be afraid to revise it. Not every cultural approach works. Just because I've explained a system that I've used, your safety process model may have 4 circles, it may have 3 circles, it may have 10 circles, right, of elements that you really want to consider. So don't be afraid to revise, don't be afraid, just be very marketed about what you're willing to lose, in your process. So I think sustaining process change, real simple. The challenge is to create a sustainable safety performance culture where heightened safety decisions happen without thinking too deeply about them, right? It's just business as usual. I think it takes a lot of data, to do that, to gain the insight within the work system to reduce risk with the management systems. And it honestly is one of the reasons I joined Intelex, is to focus on things like this, is that how can I, enhance or influence technology to help practitioners reduce all of these risks in the work systems. You don't need technology to do this today. You can start, right? It takes a look at your management system and then a really clear, defined objective to be truthful, right? To be honest about how I can understand that system. All right, so I'm going to get back and I'm going to clear up that quote I made earlier. Defining force. Really, I think it's these things, is that think about them yourself. It's the powerful ability to influence. And many times we use safety and health to lead the entire organization for management change, right? So I would tell you that your influence and how you think about management systems really will help your entire organization deliver the culture that really exceeds safety and health. I think you have a wonderful opportunity to do that, to move against resistance and inertia. What are the resistance points that are keeping you from reaching, what your potential is, and then look at things that would increase inertia. To move, open, make clear a change in direction. Do you have a vision for your organization? Do you have a mission that's clear, that's been communicated? And if not, I would tell you to do that. The influence on a body that causes it to accelerate. Once you start this work, it continues to accelerate over time if you continue to nudge it, right? To nudge it forward. So it's certainly a destination, but it's a journey, and some of you will be faster and slower, or maybe slower than others. And then just gain momentum, right? To effort to seek balance. When I do safety, I don't think too much about it, right? I don't have to, because it's a part of who we are. So that's a wonderful place to be, I think, in this system. All right, so I am more than glad to take a couple of questions. Let me look at the time. We've got like 5 minutes. But I would tell you before I take a question, this is who I am. This is my email at Intelex. I would also tell you, link in with me on LinkedIn. just search for Scott Gaddis, and I'm glad to have a conversation with you that way. It's usually easier just to message me, and I'm glad to take questions that way. And that's my personal phone number, believe it or not. If you just want to talk shop, I don't always have the answers, but I'm glad to talk shop with you, maybe some of the things that you may not be considering. All right, so we have a, let me look here, see if there's any questions at all. Share the presentation. I'm glad to share the presentation with everyone. All right, I don't see any questions, and we're almost to the end of time. All right.
Scott, can you hear me?
I can.
Scott, you're on the chat. If you have a look in the Q&A icon, click on there.
Thank you very much.
And you'll find the first one in there for you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So thank you so much for pointing that out. So the question was by an anonymous, when you discuss the safety process model, is there a specific element that's more important than the others? That's a great question. I think, and I've used them differently, when I'm going into a mature organization, I often try to look for an equal balance, within a safety process. But if it's a new organization, I took over a packaging company about, 5 or 6 years ago, and they really had some really serious compliance issues, guarding issues, lockout tagout issues, confined space issues. So I really weighted, most of my program that way until I got better control. So that's what I would tell you, is that when you look at where your performance is, where your level of losses are occurring, you may want to, to lean your safety process model a little heavier in that area until you get the control that you desire. For me, I always start the same. I always start with making sure that we're compliant in the physical environment, and then making sure that my folks are trained, that my people are trained, they know what to do, they have the skills that they need to have, and they can give it back. So the second one there, as you discuss loss causation, you referred to the management system. Are you suggesting we look at the management system as the starting and ending point? Yes. I mean, the simple question of that is yes, is that, much like we would have an audit, of the environment we're working in, we should audit our management systems, right? If you look at ISO or ANSI or some of the other management systems, there's a lot of information there that are simply put together in question form that you should answer, and to see where the fractures are. Do I have gaps within this management system that are creating opportunity for me to experience loss, right? And it's not always, as easy as how I'm telling you today, but it is your starting point, is to look at the management system and see how that's affecting the culture that I'm really trying, or I desire to have. Ending point, I think it's a continuous process. For me, when I was practicing in manufacturing companies, it was an annual activity at least, as I was going to look back at my management system, and I was going to look for opportunities to grow forward. If you're working with a good management system, they should not all be about compliance, right? It should be how we act as leaders, what our engagement is with the workforce, how we train and build capabilities. So absolutely, I think it is. How can we influence management to appreciate a management system principles when most of the time they see this as something we do to pass an audit? You have a value issue, right? I mean, this is a leadership issue. And the reason that I was asked to take over, I think, Kimberly Clark at the time, is because I was really good at communicating management systems, and the president of the company, he knew that if we could win in safety and health, that he could influence the rest of the management systems in the company. So I would say it like this, is that as safety and health professionals, you know more about management systems than anyone does, right? You're probably more attuned to why we have management systems, and your influence is to build enough value within the leadership team to not only look at a safety and health management system or an EHS management system, but a management system. And I think that's the real important thing. So it's an honest discussion. You could take these slides alone and have the discussion about what I think are important parts of a safety process model, is that management leadership getting buy-in, value for safety and health are really important aspects of how a management system can perform in an organization. And without it, you're creating microcultures, right? You're actually going down deep in the organization, try to grow it from the bottom up. And it doesn't work very well that way. So I'm glad, I mean, if you want to link in with me or call me, I'm glad to give you some ideas on how to do that. We're about out of time. And then I'd like to begin sending a safety and health letter to our staff. Do you have any ideas how I can build content to keep our engineers engaged? I think absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of content that's actually free to use. I certainly have a lot that I don't mind sending to be a part of that. Look at people in your organization that that you have, and that's certainly a way to do that. But I'm glad to help on that. There's a lot of content that you can literally take. It's not protected, or like me, I put into a lot of newsletters. They simply send me an email and ask me if I could use it, and I'm more than glad to do that. There are plenty of writers that would do that for you as well. Okay, I think, let me look at my time. We are over time, so it looks like there may be, if you have questions, just please email me, please link in with me. I'm more than glad to have the conversation with you. And I really do appreciate you having this time with me and dedicating yourself to doing these things with me. I don't always have to be right about things. It's just the way that I've done my practice, but I'm more than glad to help you going forward. Thanks, everyone, and I appreciate your participation.